Hello and most welcome to 949 in our sequential Heidegger lecture series. And today I will talk about what is the meaning in a word, or alternatively in a letter. And once more, in a way, it is the question of the sign and the signifier, or the signifier and the signified. And what is the difference or difference that is the signifier that makes up the meaning and makes it to mean something? What exactly is the smallest detail that makes up the difference between two letters? For instance, D and T. What is the absolute minimal difference? Or where in the D lies the meaning of D, if we want to put it as an atom, and how to discern it from a T. I would say there has been a centrism going on where we reduced what a T and a D and a P is. From this onset it has been rather complicated with serifs and underlinings, extra thick lines, extra thin lines, but they have seemed to be part of an absence, a redundancy almost, or a supplement to the thing, whereas the central meaning is in the very letter. And is it so that the space within a D or a P or a T, is that negligible, something we can neglect, something we do not need to take into account, something not central to the very expressiveness of the letter? It's a part of the absence. And one could also pose the question this way: what is part of the letter or the signifier that constitute true difference, and not this superfluous extra difference with the decorations in the letters? We do in our Jan Eisken's method train letters. They carry serifs, thin supportive lines, underlinings, curvature. From a centrist perspective, that would be redundancy. It is redundant to the very meaning they carry. It's even more so, we don't even think about these matters. We would not even say that is insignificant to meaning. We don't need those extra things. And of course, in Sweden we have been simplifying handwriting, the types, the fonts, for at least 100 years. From being extensively decorative from a modern perspective, they have been more and more skin bad. We trust more and more in the meaning of the words. And we trust the words to carry that meaning no matter what, so to speak, physical extension they have. There is something of a redundancy in the physical extension altogether somehow. And maybe we can make do with just meaning. I don't know if there is anyone out there at this point that finds this reasoning may be somewhat problematic, or that there are some questions that could be made here. It's just a rhetorical question, need not to be answered. Let me continue for a while before I go to the very kernel of the thing. But deciding on meanings, and I put this in parentheses, which is very unclear what meaning would be, but I will delve into that in a later paragraph. I would say that by making this cut, by applying some hidden law, unknown hypothesis of what is central, we have made a random cut, and we have indirectly, or more correct would say, we've gone the back wave. This is how meaning came to be established. Meaning cannot be without centrism. Let me put this into some personal perspective. I remember myself when I was studying linguistics. We had these rather fancy words for the same thing. They were called extension and intension. Intention was supposed to be completely self-evident. This is what you mean, the professor said. On some plane it sounds okay, but if you want to look further, which I wanted to do, I wanted to take a more considered gander into this. All of a sudden meaning wasn't that clear. How do you differentiate one meaning to another one? My question was exactly that. What sort of difference is there in my head or in the Beetle box between the different meanings? How do I tell them if intention, as the professor said, is purely intentional or inner, only inner? So supposedly we have a whole system within ourselves that is completely inner, and we can sort of communicate or have a language game within ourselves, hidden from everyone else and also hidden from ourselves. And we call that language game rather coarsely and crude, not very exact, call that intention. But as soon as we start looking to what is this intention, many problems evolve directly. Who decides the connection between my intention and the thing out there? Is it Laplace demon? Is it a benevolent helper somewhere, living in another galaxy, that is all of a sudden willing to help me with this strange problem and establish somewhat connection between my inner, hidden for everyone, even hidden to myself, intention, and connect that to the extension, and also do that for everyone in the same way, although we don't share anything? Is it slowly becoming a bit problematic over there? I would imagine. Why was my question ignored in the hallways of linguistics and later in logic and philosophy? At that moment, I sentimentally or subjectively or emotionally felt that the professor was jumping between levels. In some way, when he said intention, he was using regular language, although with a very fancy word. And of course, in regular language, we can ask. It's okay to ask the meaning of something, or what did you mean when you said that? But to a deeper level, that can't be asked in the same way. Something becomes curious if you take it too far. And as we already know from Derrida, extension doesn't fare that much better. It's even hard to tell one plant from another. I have an excellent example here. This is St. John's wort. And as you can see, it is slightly different from a St. John's wort. St. John's wort. Is it a St. John's wort? Well, I said it most definitely is. But is it a subspecies? Hard to say. I would say it is. But what of this very plant is the difference between this and the main species? That'd be very hard to say. I can point to a few things, but they wouldn't exhaust the matter, and they would be at different levels altogether, which makes difference much complicated. It is just simply different. You cannot take it to a lower level. Ordinary language works in ordinary manner, but once you do this mix, as I felt the teacher did, with a high level of accuracy, and all of a sudden comes this meaning in there, and there is no further explanation. I think someone even said that you have to ask a psychologist for that. I would say I didn't feel that to be fair, but I had nothing to say at that time. I needed Rodolophe Gasché, I needed Susie Vorobel, and now when I can truly explain this, I don't feel any regret. This is so complicated in one way and simple in another way. It's level shifting. I start to understand it's all fractal. You can have both levels at the same time, but you can't treat the both levels in the same way. And in order to sort of perceive there's a level shifting, you need to be fractal yourself. Maybe you could feel at most within yourself, that's a very odd way to speak. Maybe I feel that now. I don't know. But I hope to, maybe in a week. I will in later paragraph take out why this is problematic for practical reasons. And that is of course very pertinent, because today writing is more important than ever before, and we are sort of tricked to in the scholarly system to simplify too much on basis on assumptions that are not really crystal clear, or I would say even grave mistake within the language game. And it would be a real pity to sort of accustom the people to accept these things without questioning them, which of course they can't. Little bit like learning the children, like they did in the 19th century, to go to sleep you use a sugar cube, and it's a bit laced with alcohol or opium. Something that, well, the latter leads to constipation and the former would lead to alcoholism or brain injury. The It's nothing to give to small children that don't have well-developed livers to take care of the alcohol. Or maybe this is even worse, I don't know. It's like you baking in on knowledge, and you, in a very unintentional way, mix knowledge with non-knowledge, and in the end you can't tell which is which. Levels becomes intermingled, and if they're not kept clear from each other, you end up having these philosophical problems, as I had, and my professor as well. Of course. When we take away the complications in the letter, we lessen fractality. And if we give up this idea of meaning in a more exaggerated way, as in linguistics, we will lose our power to sort of speak to others or understand the text. This is, of course, pointing to what could heal the text, mend the text, deconstruction on mend, Derrida on mend, to make it whole again, to add the serifs, or try to sort of clear out the centrism, because centrism is not a general thing in that way. It is not an ideology. Yes, there is a problem here. I've been speaking of metaphysics of presence. It can be perceived to, in the end, that it is a particular ideology that you subscribe to. But it's not. It's more of something that doesn't look like anything that we normally encounter. Therefore, it defies description. But we can still learn to recognize it when it is at work. And the more we get into this, the more we learn about it, the more we can make it a bodily understanding. And we can get back to the knowledge that we once had. It is never permanently lost. Knowledge just can't go away. That has to do with chaotic systems don't disappear. They are there. This, one could say, it is the very structure of the universe. It would be almost making chaotic system into logocentrism. But you get my point, you get my drift, I hope. This is more about healing, both on the endogenous side and on the exogenous side. We sort of decenter and we get back to presencing again. And we realize slowly that this meaning is also a temporal problem. It is skipping one bit in the production of letter. When we simplify a letter, we are taking away of the original knowledge. It is not an aestheticism, it is not radically exterior to the letter, it is part and parcel of the letter. And it has possibly so many different reasons for it. To calm us, or they were actually constructed from a calmer mind once upon a time. Most of our letters were made by Romans. Why? Question could be, should the Roman add these underlining serifs and so forth? They were practical people. The reason they made things were for practical reasons. They were not obsessed by unnecessary aestheticism. Not at all. We decide preemptive, and here is the temporal and spatial pre-experience and pre the doing of the letter. We decide what is central. And that becomes a very subjective take. And by that I mean going once more to the box of the scarabée or the beetle box, going away from actually understanding the letter and the word. And I would say this is dyslexia light, before it developed into that massive problematic problem, looking for meaning when you try to express something that should be done carefully and exactly as it's made. It is a sort of sloppiness, laziness. People would say, why is it laziness? The teachers say I should do it. Well, there could be an inherent laziness. Complexity is what transfers read out, read in. We are not that much separated from the world. There is a separation, but it's not so great that we have nothing to do with this world. We have already always been in this world, and that needs to be remembered, might even more than mementi mori, remember you deadly. I would say a better sign everywhere, on the buses, on the buildings, would be, you have always already been in the world. You were not brought here from a transcendental, otherworldly place. There is an inherent assumption that we don't live in this world, and that we could be like the demon of Laplace, and that it could be other reasons for true meaning than complexity, a fractality. I think the most honest explanation of intention and this meaning-bearing function, whatever that is, would be a professor called Håkan, and he made a line between signifier and sign, signifier and signified, intention and extension. He said this is the meaning line. I never seen it, but we have to believe it's there, otherwise the whole system would fall. I think that was the most honest. That is not intellectual cleverness. There's admitting there is a problem there, but at the same time ignoring it because it's too complicated or too nasty a subject to take up. He never did. I do it now though, and we need to look at these things in the context of we are in the world. We are interengaging with the world. Intention cannot be of something otherworldly. Yes, it's more connected to ourselves, but not entirely shut off from the world. That won't do. It's a matter of degree, I'd say, and realizing that reading a text is very similar to, as Susie Frobel calls, interacting perceptually with the world. You need to send something out, and this sending out takes action into the equation. You need to really read the letters. They cannot be ignored. They are there. Black ink on white paper. There's nothing to be ignored there. It is absolutely real. There's nothing unnecessary with it. This is the text. And then you wonder, which I do as well, even when at the very point of saying this I start wondering, how on earth can this black smothering of ink on a piece of paper convey meaning, stories, magical things, fantastic things, all those material, facts, myth, religion, literature, poesy, It does. And I don't know if we have the right to ask why that is. But sure, it should not lead us to invent an otherworldly connection somewhere. You might have to accept that we are actually of this world somehow. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's here you find every bit of fractality of the great works, whether it be Strindberg, Moberg, as I'm reading now, or Shakespeare, often mentioned, the Bible. It is in the very letters. Need not to search for meaning, because that would always already be something arbitrarily. You would put unnecessary emotional subjective contents into the text. And what is subjectivity driven to its outmost line if not dyslexia, when you can no longer write what you want to say? And I would say we have an aphasia today, even in talking. People do not make themselves understood because of this. We have a lack of understanding in the modern world. Deep misunderstanding of language itself. People do not seem to understand what other people are saying to them anymore, or whatever is to read on the internet or in books. This is of course similar to what I said earlier about paintings. The Renaissance paintings are, because the lack of fractality within the subject, no longer within reach for our perceptual mind. It is our pre-reading, it is our pre-looking at the painting and how much fractality we can emanate from ourselves, and that takes training. So we've gone into sort of perceptual laziness. We are no longer exogenously taking in things. We become more in the way of being a looped system, which gives its own energy to this own making, but at the same time more or less shut off both from the external world and ourselves, our feelings, our bodies, our understanding of what we are and where we are going. It's not just that we lose connection to the outer world, we also lose connection to our inner world. This is why deconstruction is a healing tendency, body and mind. We become healthier with deconstruction. And as I mentioned many times before, we need dividing lines where they are necessary. For instance, between dorsal and ventral areas. And by taking those parts into our understanding, our knowledgeable I, our self, rather than the automatic unaware ego, we get into the text and we can also make ourselves heard. There are some similarities here with the modern perception, where we don't send out enough complexity to sort of have this endogenous, exogenous readout, which is fractal, and very much depending on how much complexity you send out. The complexity that can only come from your own history, your personality, your wants, your intentions, and so forth. Those are the only complexities, only so to speak. They are quite massive. But those are the only complexities you can find within yourselves, and they are needed. Otherwise we sort of lose access to knowledge, and we also lose our predictive power of understanding, retention and pretension. I can make a parallel here to dyslexica, where you sort of plan rather than pretend, or make futuring, or future, whatever sort of verb you could use there. Not active. Sort of the text comes to you, and when you're not preemptively sort of get into the text, get into the world, actively send out your gaze to the world, and at the same time being relaxed enough to let the world come to you, it will be a strain. And this strain is the same as being out of sync in time and not being in space. From a knowledge perspective, that would be a little bit like non-local knowledge, like Laplace demon. I think it's a very good gestalt to think about the demon that Laplace constructed. It was the same very demon that made the whole physical system work by itself. And when Laplace said to Napoleon, we only need a decimal, there's no longer any need for that construct God, he said to shock Napoleon. He wasn't referring to no need for a God. He made his own subjective beetle box-like God, and that was the demon, not being situated anywhere. What a fancy thing. I don't think it's a rather good thing to accept without thinking. I invite you to think about Laplace demon, where it would be situated in your own thinking system or your own world. It is not something unnecessary to think about. These are exactly these things, like the the demon of Laplace, or the demiurge, or the panopticon. Those are the things they've been thinking very hard on in quantum mechanics. These were the material for the discussions in Copenhagen and in Solvay in Brussels. People have been thinking hard about this, getting into the real kernel. And I had to say, actually, that is the material of the great discussion between Einstein and Niels Bohr in Solvay, where somehow Einstein managed to get the demon into the equation unbeknownst to himself, which is really important to understand. This was not something known by Einstein himself, because he never came to realize it. Not even after Niels Bohr explained to him and his followers, there is a demon hypothesized here. There is an interference. And by ignoring that interference, you take away the observer. Until his dying day, Einstein had no understanding for that there was a demon in his equation. Something or somebody having no location, being of an unknown nature, not being a part of this world. I would say not of another world as well. Do not trick yourself into thinking that the demon can come from some other place. That wouldn't work either. It has to be outside of experience in a very definite way, not in another galaxy, completely out of every experience, ever. So what we do by this is let fuzziness in the order of time, because letters definitely need to come in a certain order. If you want to spell, for instance, Stockholm, first there is an S, then there is a T, then there is a O, then there is a C, and then you have a K, H, O, M, N, Stockholm. No, N. It has to be in this specific order. Dyslexia or dyslexia light, which I call now, is a fussiness. It's an unlearning of interacting with the exogenous, or not accepting the complexity that is needed from your subjective perspective, that is doing complicated letters exactly as they are written from the very beginning when they were constructed. And thereby you have enough complexity to sort of meet the other complexity. This is the only accepted way from mathematics, physics, topology and fractality to have any meaning coming over. But it's more than meaning, it's the whole world coming over. And it cannot be reduced to pure meaning, because pure meaning is something of an anomaly, something that is not of this world. If you asked, is my teacher is meaning orange juice, they would say no, it's something different. Is it that tree? Is it that difference? Is it the concept? The question will be forever and ever. You'll never reach true meaning. You only find more and more differences somehow. And you understood that you've been trying to do a reductio ad absurdum. Next paragraph. There is a very unclear character to meaning and significance. Intention, meaning, in this very, with this usually very complicated expressions, but coming directly from ordinary language, renamed and causing havoc in the thinking system. It makes it very hard to transfer your thinking into action. And when I say action, could be your writing, could also be on a computer, because being more fractal is a habit of life. Once you acquired a higher level, you can bring it into all areas. But you might need the more complex writing to have it established. You need at some point in your life have that fractality established within yourself. And that should not be simplified. But once you have it, you might not have to constantly repeat it, because that fractality would stay with you. As all chaotic system, it is incredibly resilient. It won't leave you easily. Could leave you, but it will most suddenly, if you feed it well, stick with you. And you can make simple letters. But the thing is, the ones in the schooling system that says to the pupils, you need no longer to do these complications. They already have these complications. And they are actually deeming the children not to be as fractal as they are. They are neglecting their duty as educators for reasons not even known to themselves. We need to get more fractal. Complexity in itself is a good thing. It's resilience, it's stability, it's permanence. And as I told you before, it's also the now. And that now you can only reach if you've been doing complex, historically derived things like complex writing and complex reading. And I always thought there has to be a reason why in the times before, when they had so much other things to do, that made writing so complex. You ask someone today, they would just say silliness, or they were stupid before. We used to be very stupid, and now we are enormously intelligent. And we can easily, by doing some sort of Gödelian calculation, sort of come to the conclusion that was completely unnecessary, and people of the Middle Ages, Roman times, Greek times, they were absolutely wondrously silly-minded or short-sighted. How on earth can anyone say such a megalomaniac thing? And that is, I'm not going to bring up now, but I will say modern times is the time of the enormous ego. And that is the part of the knowledge. This ego knows everything without even doing the stuff. And this is what I mean with laziness. It's in the system. It encourages you to be lazy. But this laziness will punish you and no one else. You are the victim for it. Yes, there are people out there, educators, academia, that encourage you to do it. But they don't force you to do it. At some point, you actually have a choice. Reinvent that choice, as Heidegger would have seen it. Reinvent yourself in a way. And take that choice. And you see that your whole life will change immediately. Once you realize you have a saying in this world. You can actually choose. And then I don't think you would choose anymore not to be part of the world. It's not such a nice an option not to participate in the complexities, not being able to breathe the free nature of reality, taking in all the beauty, all the creativity, because meanings kills off creativity. That makes everything the same. And this is, of course, the obstacle in approaching the great works of the former masters. That's why we can't see the Renaissance paintings. That's why the beauty of Florence, Venice, Genoa, and so forth are inaccessible to most people, including me, because we're not complex enough. And this stressful time fuzziness might be the most irritating ones, because that sucks up energy, and this automata of the ego sort of acts like a parasite in the moment. Not absolutely correct, because it's not completely external like a parasite, like a tick, but it has a similar working process. It sucks up the energy of the present moment, it conquers it, and it demands you to put it into a temporal order, the linear order, to make every moment real, and you have this process of repeating in your head everything that happened to you in a most mechanical way, ruminating, or like I call regurgitating. This is healing of language itself. This is bringing back a full force language which have all the fractality, the depth. It has delta T depth, it's had delta T width, and it's had delta T dimensionality. It is a language from all reason that is most forceful and convincing and really speaks to others, not because of intention. You don't have to scream yourself hoarse by claiming your opinions. You can talk calmly in a reasoned way, and your language will once more have the energy it once upon a time had. People will listen, trust me. Fractality tells its own truth. Doesn't need intention, doesn't need this naive line of my professor. It is the very fractality that shows the truth of it. That is the substance of it. is perceivable in an extended now, not a thin line now, but an extended now that goes well in the projected eternal future and well into the retended or retentional past, and it gets nurtured with all the energy, all the knowing of the past, of yourself and all the exogenous, and it gains that force. And for every time you bring in more complexity and you stop feeling those things are external, those are absentees, they don't belong to the subject, this a priori decision what's part of reality before you even meet reality, that division need not to be made. Instead, imagine reality in the most complex way. And complex imagination doesn't block anything out, but simple imagination. Imagination that is more in the region of black and white, right or wrong, superficial, distancing things are much less fractal. This is perpetually scale. There are no absolute truths, because we already always been in this world. There is no parallel system of meaning existing in, not in another dimension, nowhere, and that reads off everything. We are here in this world, and this world has a future. It's not an absence, it has a past, it's not an absence, it's part of reality. And I feel this also when I read newspapers. I had a gander in the present newspaper. It has become more superficial. And I wonder sometimes if the journalists themselves really understand what they are writing. Of course, they're not suffering from radical problems in writing, but they don't seem to convey any meaning anymore. It feels more and more not as lucid, not as clear. No clear-cut writings anymore. And what they do is contradict themselves the day after or 10 years later. There is no projection. There is no direction in what they're writing, because their take on what they are saying, their meaning of the words, is not of this world. And therefore, I would say it's doomed to be completely random, subjective, and different at every instance. And this is the lack of meaning. This is the inflation of meaning. This is the coming into the modern world that lacks meaning, lacks intention, lacks the force of the word, lacks the force of the brush, the pen, you name it. And also the computer, because the computer can become a massive tool once you get into the fractal complexity within yourselves. You can play every instrument once you're fractal. It's almost like being Mozart, being able to reproduce within your inner fractality every instrument in the orchestra. He had amazing ability, but that possibility, I would say, that obviously has to be for each and every one. It's just training. Massive training would make that accessible to you. And you feel the relaxing taking in of the world and see that you are situated somewhere. And every time you do that, you put some extra complexity to your world. It's not a bad thing. It's a good deed. It's a good karmic thing to do if you want to use Eastern language. I think it's time to end there. I say thank you very much for now, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.